Beyond the Gate spoilers tease that Regina's patience finally snapped when she saw June lingering too close to Samantha and Tyrell. The two children were laughing in the schoolyard, their backpacks slung low, unaware of the storm brewing in the adult world around them. From across the street, Regina's eyes narrowed, her steps quickening until she was standing between June and the gate. "Stay away from them," she said, her voice low but edged with steel. June's lips curled into a mocking smile. "You think I'm some stranger? Those are my kids." The words were like a match struck in dry brush. Regina stepped closer, their faces almost level. "You forfeited the right to call them yours a long time ago. You're toxic, June. You can't give them the life they deserve." Passers-by slowed, sensing a confrontation they didn't fully understand. June, never one to back down, raised her chin defiantly. "I didn't give them up. They were taken from me. You've been feeding everyone your side of the story, but I know what you did." For a moment, the tension was a taut wire between them. Regina's voice dropped to a near whisper, each word deliberate. "You left them. And I will not let you poison their lives again." That encounter burned itself into the memory of everyone who witnessed it, but for Jacob and Naomi, it was more than gossip, it was a puzzle piece. They had already been connecting subtle threads for weeks, and this public clash only confirmed their suspicion. June wasn't just some troubled woman hovering around the children. She might actually be their mother. Jacob, with his meticulous nature, began pulling records, timelines, and scraps of local memory together. Naomi, whose instinct for truth was sharpened by her own complicated past, decided the only way to know for sure was to speak directly to June. Their meeting was tense from the outset. June's small apartment was sparsely furnished, the smell of cigarette smoke and stale coffee clinging to every surface. She spoke in circles, drifting between anger and sorrow, and when Naomi pressed about her past, June finally produced an old, worn photograph. "These are mine," she said, holding it like an artifact. Two young children, no older than 5, stared out from the faded print. Naomi's stomach tightened. She had seen those faces before recently. Days earlier, in Smitty and Martin's living room, she had noticed the exact same photograph on a shelf, framed neatly as if it had always belonged there. The realization had been a jolt, and now, seeing the original in June's possession, it no longer felt like coincidence. When Naomi told Jacob, they both knew there was no other explanation. Samantha and Tyrell weren't just familiar, they were June's children. The certainty settled over them with the weight of inevitability, but it brought with it more questions than answers. Why had Regina stepped so forcefully between June and the children? If her aim was to protect them, from what exactly? And what was the truth behind June's claim that Regina was the one who caused the separation in the first place? June's accusations painted Regina as a manipulator, someone who had stolen the children under the guise of protection. Regina's version, however, was far more damning. June, consumed by addiction, had neglected the children to the point of danger. In Regina's eyes, keeping Samantha and Tyrell away from their biological mother was not just a choice, it was a duty. The deeper Naomi and Jacob dug, the more they saw the outlines of a larger, hidden conflict between the two women, one that stretched back years. Regina's disgust toward June was visceral, unguarded. In private, she had said more than once that June was poison, incapable of providing even the most basic care for her own health, let alone for children. Still, Naomi couldn't ignore the possibility that Regina had made her own moral compromises. Protecting children was one thing, controlling the truth was another. It was Naomi who decided to take the next step. One afternoon, she returned to June's apartment carrying the photograph she had quietly taken from Smitty's house. June's eyes went wide the moment she saw it. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, and for a few seconds she said nothing, simply staring at the image as if trying to will herself back into that frozen moment in time. Then, without warning, the door swung open and Regina walked in. The air changed instantly, thick with hostility, sharp with unspoken history. "You think bringing her that photo changes anything?" Regina's voice was steady, but Naomi caught the faintest flicker of unease in her eyes. Naomi looked between them, her own surprise barely contained. So you do know. Regina's jaw tightened. She didn't answer directly, but her silence was answer enough. June's voice rose, laced with fury. She's known all along. You've been parading around as some savior while you've been stealing my kids from me. Regina took a step forward, her calm now icy. I kept them safe. You were a wreck, June. High more often than you were sober. They deserved a chance at a life without chaos. June lunged then, her hands shoving Regina hard enough to make her stumble. Naomi had to step between them. Stop it. This isn't helping anyone. But June wasn't listening. Her words spilled out in jagged bursts, accusations, insults, curses. Regina, for her part, refused to back down, her disdain matching June's rage. In the corner of the room, the photograph sat on the coffee table, a silent witness to the chaos, its smiling subjects unaware of the storm their existence had ignited. Away from that confrontation, the children's lives continued, oblivious to the tangled war being waged over them. Samantha and Tyrell were celebrating something entirely different, the success of a plan they had been quietly nurturing for weeks to reunite Smitty and Martin, whose friendship had fractured under the strain of distance and misunderstanding. The joy in their laughter was genuine, unburdened. But Naomi and Jacob knew that joy was fragile. When they finally brought their findings to Smitty and Martin, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Shock washed over them first, followed by confusion, then something heavier, fear. What are you saying? Smitty asked, his voice tight. That June, Jacob hesitated, aware of the ground they were treading. She's their biological mother. The room fell silent. The weight of that truth settled like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything they thought they knew. If the truth reached Samantha and Tyrell, it would shatter the foundation of the family they had built with Smitty and Martin. And if June decided to fight for them, no matter her past, the legal and emotional battles would be long and brutal. Naomi found herself asking a question she didn't want to voice aloud. Could the children survive another separation? Or worse, the knowledge that their own mother had left them, whether by choice or circumstance, for so many years. Those questions loomed large, unanswered, as the days in Fairmont Crest moved toward a confrontation none of them could avoid. The revelation hung over everyone like a storm cloud, darkening the mood in every conversation and shadowing even the lightest moments. Smitty had barely spoken since Jacob and Naomi left that day, and Martin's attempts to break the silence were met with little more than distracted nods. Both men had thought of themselves as anchors for Samantha and Tyrell, and now they felt the ground beneath them shifting. It wasn't just about the children's origin, it was about the fear that all they had built could be dismantled overnight. Naomi spent restless nights replaying the encounter between June and Regina in her mind. The look in Regina's eyes that day was burned into her memory, not just anger, but something more complex. There was truth in her words, Naomi was almost certain of it, but there was also something unspoken, a piece of the puzzle Regina wasn't ready to share. Jacob, more cautious in his conclusions, urged her to hold back until they had more concrete proof before confronting either woman again. Still, Naomi knew that time was running out. June had not disappeared quietly after that volatile meeting. She had been seen near the children's school more than once, sometimes alone, sometimes speaking to strangers no one recognized. Word traveled quickly in Fairmont Crest, and each new sighting sparked rumors. Some claimed she was preparing to take the children away, others insisted she was trying to provoke Regina into making a mistake. Whatever the truth, her presence stirred unease in everyone connected to Samantha and Tyrell. Regina, meanwhile, had tightened her control. She spoke to the children in warm, reassuring tones, but became sharper, more guarded when speaking to adults about the situation. To those who pressed her for answers, she repeated the same refrain: they are safe where they are. That's all that matters. Yet, even her closest confidants noticed how her shoulders stayed tense, how her phone was never out of reach. Naomi's instincts told her that if the truth was going to come out, it would not come from June or Regina willingly, it would have to be drawn out. She and Jacob began piecing together a plan that went beyond photographs and hearsay. They started with record birth certificates, adoption files, anything that could tie June directly to Samantha and Tyrell in the eyes of the law. Their search led them to old municipal archives, where Jacob uncovered documents that hinted at a closed adoption handled quietly, with minimal court oversight. The dates matched almost perfectly with the timeline June had given in her scattered, emotional retellings of the past. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. If Regina had indeed orchestrated the adoption, she had done so in a way that ensured the children would remain in an environment she trusted. But that also meant she had knowingly kept their biological heritage from them, perhaps believing it was for their own good. Naomi wrestled with the ethics of it all. Was protecting children from a harmful parent worth rewriting their history? Could Regina's actions be both compassionate and controlling at the same time? The tension reached a breaking point when Samantha stumbled across Naomi and Jacob in conversation with Smitty. She had only heard fragments, mother, adoption, not supposed to know, but it was enough to make her demand answers. Her voice shook as she confronted Smitty, her eyes darting between him and Naomi. Tyrell appeared moments later, catching the tail end of her words. The room froze. Smitty tried to reassure them, but his hesitation was a crack in the facade. Tyrell's brow furrowed, and he asked the question no one wanted to answer. Are you saying we have a mom out there who didn't want us? Naomi felt the air go out of the room. She knelt to meet Tyrell's eyes and said carefully, there's more to the story than that. And you deserve to hear it from someone who was there. That night, the fragile shield Regina had built around the truth began to crumble. Samantha and Tyrell, now aware that something had been hidden from them, insisted on meeting June. Regina resisted at first, her voice breaking as she argued that it would only reopen wounds and cause confusion. But the more she fought, the more the children pushed back, sensing there was something she feared. When the meeting finally happened, it was nothing like the tearful reunion June might have imagined. Samantha was guarded, Tyrell skeptical. June's attempts to embrace them were met with polite distance. She tried to explain, stumbling over her words, shifting blame toward Regina, toward her own struggles, toward the world at large. The children listened, but their faces revealed little. In the days that followed, they returned to Smitty and Martin's home quieter than usual. They didn't speak much about June, but their questions came in other forms, asking about their early childhood, about where certain toys or clothes had come from, about why certain photographs didn't exist. Regina, realizing the damage could not be undone, shifted her focus to ensuring the children understood her reasons. She sat with them one evening, not as an authority figure, but as someone who had made choices she hoped they would one day see as acts of love. You have the right to know where you came from, she said, but you also have the right to be safe, and I wasn't sure those two things could exist together. The words hung in the air, and though neither Samantha nor Tyrell responded immediately, something in their expressions softened. They were beginning to understand that the truth was not a clean divide between good and evil, but a complicated, messy space where love and hurt often lived side by side. For Naomi and Jacob, the journey had shifted as well. What began as an investigation for facts had turned into a lesson in the weight of those facts once uncovered. They had wanted answers, but answers, they now saw, had consequences far beyond the moment of discovery. Smitty and Martin, relieved that the children had chosen to stay, braced themselves for the reality that the bond they shared would now have to coexist with the knowledge of another Connectiona mother who had been absent, but who would always remain a part of their story. In Fairmont Crest, life moved forward, but it did so with new eyes. Trust was no longer something assumed. It had to be built again and again in small acts and honest words. And for Samantha and Tyrell, the future would be shaped not by the secrets that had once been kept from them, but by how they chose to carry the truth now that it was theirs to hold. The weeks that followed felt strangely calm on the surface, but everyone knew the quiet was fragile, like a sheet of ice thin enough to break with the wrong step. Samantha and Tyrell went about their routine school, friends, weekend visits with Smitty and Martin, but there was a subtle shift in how they moved through the world. They asked fewer direct questions, but their eyes lingered longer on certain moments, The way Regina's voice softened when she said goodnight, the way Smitty and Martin's conversations sometimes stopped mid-sentence when they entered the room. They were learning to read between the lines, and what they found there wasn't always comfortable. June, after the tense meeting with the children, stayed away for a time, though no one believed it was permanent. She had tasted proximity to them again, and that taste would be hard for her to forget. In her absence, Regina worked quietly to reinforce the stability she had fought to build. She coordinated school activities, planned weekend outings, and made sure Samantha and Tyrell saw their home life as steady and secure. Still, in her private moments, she wrestled with the truth she could never fully escape. She had made decisions for them without their consent, decisions they might one day resent. Naomi and Jacob found themselves less in the role of investigators and more as reluctant guardians of everyone's emotional well-being. They checked in on Smitty and Martin, offering practical help when the strain showed. They spoke with Regina, not to challenge her anymore, but to ensure she wasn't isolating herself in the name of protecting the children. And, occasionally, they reached out to June not because they trusted her entirely, but because ignoring her would only feed the possibility of her acting recklessly. One evening, Jacob received a call from Martin. His voice was low, cautious. "She's been here. June." She left a note in the mailbox. Said she wants one more chance to explain everything to them. The note was simple, written in uneven script. "I want to tell you my side. You deserve to hear it without anyone standing in the way." There was no threat, no demand, but everyone felt the weight of what it implied. A second meeting could either heal some of the fracture or rip it open entirely. After a long discussion, Regina agreed not because she wanted June back in their lives, but because denying the children the choice felt dangerously close to the mistake she had made before. The meeting took place in a neutral setting, the small community center by the harbor. Naomi and Jacob were there, sitting off to the side in case things escalated. June entered looking tired, her hair pulled back, her clothes cleaner and more presentable than before. She greeted Samantha and Tyrell with a quiet hi that carried both hope and hesitation. This time, she didn't reach for them immediately. She began with her past, her mistakes, her addiction, the nights she didn't come home. She didn't try to paint herself as blameless. She admitted she had lost her way, and that by the time she realized what she'd risked, Regina had stepped in. Her voice faltered when she spoke about the day she realized they were gone. "I hated her for it," she said, glancing toward Regina without bitterness, but part of me knew she wasn't wrong. The children listened, their faces unreadable, but something in their posture relaxed as June continued. "She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even ask for a relationship. I just wanted you to know I wasn't indifferent. I cared. I still care. And I'm glad you've had the life you've had." When the meeting ended, no one knew quite what to call what had happened. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was no longer pure hostility either. The children left with Regina, walking a little closer to her than they had before. June stayed behind, sitting alone in the empty room for several minutes before finally leaving. In the days that followed, Samantha and Tyrell spoke more openly with Smitty and Martin about what they'd heard. They didn't excuse June's absence, but they also didn't see her as a shadow to fear anymore. The truth, with all its jagged edges, was now theirs, and they could decide how to live with it. For Regina, the relief was quiet but real. She had dreaded this moment for years, fearing it would unravel everything. Instead, it seemed to have made the children's bond to her more visible, even to themselves. They understood now that her choices had been hard, that she had carried the burden of them alone for a long time. Life in Fairmont Crest began to settle into a new rhythm, one where secrets were fewer, but where the complexity of family was acknowledged rather than hidden. June kept her distance, but sent occasional letters. Sometimes the children read them, sometimes they didn't. Regina no longer intercepted them. Naomi and Jacob, having seen the full arc of the story, stepped back. They had found the truth they were looking for, but the greater lesson had been in what happened after. The truth, once uncovered, doesn't end a story, it begins a new one. And in this new chapter, the people of Fairmont Crest carried their scars and their love side by side, knowing neither diminished the other.